Story 1. John and Wendy Williams lived next to us for 12 years. They were a wonderful couple. We had settled in a place where the city meets the countryside just before things got a bit too crowded for my liking. Their house was on the other side of the road and up a hill, but our mailboxes were right next to each other. I used to see John about once a week for years. Our schedules would just line up that way, and we'd often get the mail at the same time. He would come down in his old green truck, sit there for a minute to read his letters, and then drive back up to his cozy house, which was tucked away in the thick trees. Sometimes, if I had the time, we'd talk. Other times, I'd intentionally wait for him to leave before getting my mail, which, I admit, says more about me than anything else. John was a great guy, probably in his mid-70s, but it was hard to tell since he was so active and in such good shape. The few times I saw Wendy, it was clear they didn't share the same passion for physical activity. But at their age, that's completely understandable. John was a retired priest from the local church, and he seemed to have retired from religion altogether. He loved talking politics, and I'd always let him have his say, knowing how much it meant to him. On holidays, he and Wendy would bring over some kind of baked goods, and in early autumn, it would be a basket of vegetables from their garden. Honestly, they were some of the best neighbors you could ask for. Their house was so surrounded by trees that it was almost completely hidden. Only at night could you see its light shining through the branches. Next to our mailboxes stood a street lamp that cast a dim orange glow over our quiet road, with the rest of the night swallowed by darkness. About 8 months ago, I saw John again at the mailboxes, where he was reading his mail. I gave him a polite wave, opened my own box, and didn't expect to have a conversation. To my surprise, he got out of his truck and walked over to me. "Hey, John," I said, looking up from my letters. He gave a guilty-looking smile and hesitated. "Well, Wendy's been a lot worse," he mumbled. I put my mail down and turned to him. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't even know she was sick." I paused, hoping he would offer more details so I wouldn't have to ask. He rubbed his temples and sighed. "Her dementia has unfortunately taken a bad turn." I sighed too. "Oh no. I'm so sorry, John. Is there anything we can do to help?" I asked, feeling like he was about to ask me something. "There's nothing anyone can do to help. I have to take care of her now, so you might not see me out here as often. Or you might, but with Wendy, I just didn't want to leave you in the dark." This news affected me more than it should have. I barely knew Wendy, but seeing how this was impacting my dear neighbor and his family, I genuinely felt for him. Over the next few weeks, I saw John less and less. Wendy would be with him in the car, and he wouldn't want to talk when she was around. I didn't blame him. One morning, I woke up early to walk the dog before work. My wife usually handles this, but since she was away visiting her sister, it fell to me. The morning mist hung over the road, and the orange street lamp was still on. The dark morning was slowly waking up. The trees stood still right in my line of sight. Quincy, my wife's dog, was a little mutt, but full of life. I didn't mind taking care of her. We walked down the driveway to the main road and turned left, past the mailboxes. I debated whether to bring a flashlight, but decided Quincy wouldn't take long. We walked along the shoulder, the gravel crunching with every step as we went deeper into the mist. In the distance, I could hear the birds waking up. The road was empty. No one would be driving on it for a few more hours, and a sense of calm gradually came over me. I would have loved to spend more time outside with Quincy if I didn't have to get to work. She finally did her business, taking her sweet time, and we headed back. By this time, it was starting to get light, and the orange street lamp had turned off. My eyes were adjusting to the sudden change in lighting when I noticed some movement on the left. I flinched at first. I was startled and scared by its unfamiliar shape and movement. Quincy pulled towards it, and I looked closer to make out this strange figure on the other side of the street. If she hadn't said anything, I would never have guessed it was Wendy. She was wandering down the road in the opposite direction, wearing a nightgown. I was glad I happened to be there at that moment and that there were no cars on the road. I quickly crossed the street and went to her. She was barefoot and mumbling to herself. I called her by name, knowing full well she wouldn't recognize me, and gently guided her back towards her house. Fortunately, she hadn't gotten very far thanks to my morning walk. I didn't want to think about what would have happened if I had turned right instead of left. I helped her up the rather long driveway, which took a lot longer than it should have, and knocked on the door. John's truck wasn't there, but he pulled up 5 minutes later. He scrambled out of the car in a panic and thanked me for finding her. It was obvious she had slipped out, and he had been out looking for her. I would have stayed to talk, but helping Wendy had thrown off my schedule. I only just now realized how much worse her condition had gotten. John was profuse with his thanks, with tears in his eyes as he led her back into the house. Quincy and I walked back across the street, and I began getting ready for work. It felt good to have helped, but at the same time, I was worried. What would have happened if I hadn't been there? I shook off the chilling thought and continued getting ready. On my way to the office down the quiet back roads, I called my wife Diane and told her about Wendy. She shared my concern about what had happened. "Do they need our help?" she asked. "John is too old to take care of her, especially in her state." I agreed. There was little we could do besides keeping an eye on the situation. You can't just tell a person they need to put their significant other in a nursing home because they're not qualified enough, especially a neighbor you want to stay on good terms with. To change the subject, I asked Diane about her trip. "It's been great. Susie showed me a couple of cool things she ordered online, so I got them shipped for next day delivery. Just a heads up." Great, more junk, I thought. I was getting into the city and saw traffic was starting to build up. I ended the call with Diane, as I don't like being on the phone in traffic. The rest of the day went by as usual, except for a notification on my phone that someone was at my front door. I opened the app, which showed me an image from the camera. A man in a postal uniform was holding several boxes. "Yeah, you can just leave them there. No one's going to steal them," I said. The man gave me a thumbs up and wished me a good day as he put the boxes down. What did she order this time? I thought. Work was hectic and I ended up staying late. For once, I didn't mind. My wife was out of town and Quincy had a very long walk before I left, so it was fine. Plus, staying late meant there would be no traffic on the way back. I pulled up to the house, my headlights illuminating the boxes on the porch. I wanted to just leave them there, but I was afraid some of the items might be perishable, so I brought them inside. I put them on the table but didn't open them, as my wife likes to unbox her own packages. I glanced out the window and saw John's house, lit up in the trees. I thought for a moment, but Quincy reminded me that she needed to go out again. I put her on the leash, grabbed a flashlight, and went outside. By this time, it was completely dark. The street lamp was on, but the light wasn't enough to make Quincy and me visible to passing cars. I mostly used the flashlight to show drivers that we were on the left side of the road. We took the same route as we did in the morning. I felt bad about being gone so long, so I decided to give Quincy a longer walk. As I said, my wife usually walks the dog, so late-night walks were new to me. I never realized how dark it was out here on this solitary stretch of woods. About every 50 yards, a tall, glowing street lamp stood above us, like a checkpoint in some grim game. As I expected, not a single car drove down this abandoned road. There was little on this dark stretch besides a few houses, spaced far apart. Some of them were barely visible through the dark trees. Other houses were completely shrouded in darkness, but their driveways were visible as a fairly wide clearing with a gravel path leading deep inside. I could only tell this by the mailboxes. The farther I walked, the more I became aware of my surroundings. The eerie echoing of night sounds deep in the woods. The rustling sounds made me tense up. But it wasn't until I smelled a terrible odor that I considered turning back. I shined my light around looking for a dead animal but couldn't find anything. I found it strange that something smelled so bad, yet I couldn't locate the source. Out of a sense of duty, I kept going, though now I was shining my flashlight into the nearby woods. The light slid across the gnarly trunks of twisted trees, casting strange shadows. Quincy finally did her business. I stretched while she was taking her time, waiting for her. The snap of a twig made me look to my left, and I shined my light on a figure standing behind a tree. I had a hard time making out what it was, as its shape seemed to be blending in with the tree. But I finally made out what it was. It was a deer. The deer was peeking out from behind the tree as if it were watching me. I could see its back end with patches of brown and red. Its face looked withered and its eyes had a dull sheen. Strange. Quincy finished up and started barking in that direction. I bent down to clean up after her, and when I stood up, I shined my light back into the woods. I quickly scanned the area and realized the deer was gone. The animal intrigued me, but I didn't think much of it and started heading back home with Quincy. Even though this encounter seemed minor, the whole walk back, I had an overwhelming urge to look behind me. We finally got back, and it was almost time for me to go to bed. I had a quick dinner of leftovers and started doing my nightly routine. The house was so much quieter without Diane. The house was empty, which never bothered me before, but tonight, something was making me feel uneasy. I left the hallway light on and sat down to watch TV in the living room. I thought about taking Quincy to sleep with me, but she always moves around too much for me to get a good night's sleep. And while I would have enjoyed her company, I put her in her crate and got ready for bed. I was brushing my teeth when a notification appeared on my phone. The doorbell camera was reporting motion at the front door. I froze. I put my toothbrush down and opened the app to see what was there. On the screen, I could only see the street lamp between the trees, and everything else was pretty dark. The porch light was off, and I regretted not leaving it on. Most of the screen was pixelated because of the poor camera quality. I couldn't see anything, but I was curious. If nothing else, I wanted to turn on the porch light. I walked to the front door, flipped the porch light on, and peered out the window next to the door. The yellow light spread about 10 yards before dissolving into darkness. The porch was empty, and the small lit area seemed motionless. Maybe it was a bug or a raccoon, I excused myself. I left the porch light on and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to Quincy whining in her crate. It took me a moment to remember that Diane was still away and that I needed to walk her. I groggily got up, used the restroom, put on my slippers, and opened Quincy's crate. I put her on her leash, left the house, and headed towards the road. At John's house, I saw flashing blue and red lights. I sighed, expecting the worst. A part of me wanted to walk up there with Quincy and check on him, but I decided he needed time to speak with the police. Quincy and I had a quick walk and headed back. The morning walk was overshadowed by my worry for Wendy and John. We got back to the house and I put Quincy away. I didn't have to go to work today, but I still had a few errands to run in town. I'll check on John when I get back, I thought. I pulled out of the driveway and called Diane while driving. She didn't answer, likely because it was still so early. I drove in silence, running my errands, buying groceries and other necessities. I pulled up to the house and remembered the police lights at John's. I quickly put the groceries away and walked over to his driveway. The police cars were already gone. I knocked on the door and he answered almost immediately. There was a worried look behind his small smile. "Hey, John, I just thought I'd stop by." I saw the police lights and wanted to make sure everything was all right. A look of worry reappeared on John's face. Actually, no. Wendy is gone again, and I can't find her. I locked down the house and kept an eye on her, but she slipped away in the middle of the night. I was expecting bad news, but this still made me anxious. Oh gosh, John, I'm so sorry. Let me know if I can do anything to help. John's tired face smiled for a moment, and he nodded. I'll be sure to reach out, he said. The rest of the day I felt terrible for Wendy, but more so for John. I was constantly trying to keep an eye on the road as I was getting home, and even during walks with Quincy. I was more vigilant about being outside. Later that day, I called Diane and told her the news. She was saddened, but was obviously not going to let it get in the way of her relaxation with her sister. That night, I took Quincy for her last walk and felt obligated to go on a longer one. It was around 9 at night, and I brought a flashlight to scan the woods for Wendy. I doubted I would make any difference, but I would be outside anyway, so it was no problem. We went on our normal route, but despite my looking and increased distance, we found nothing. Eventually, we had to turn back, and we walked down the dark street. As we approached my house, I saw John's truck sitting at the mailboxes, with the engine still running. He was probably doing one last search before bed. We walked towards John's truck as he was sitting under the street lamp. As I got closer, I turned off my flashlight and approached the passenger side door closest to me and knocked on the window. John jumped at the knock and grabbed his torso. With his right hand, he rolled down the window, and with his left, he was clutching his stomach. A dark liquid was slowly seeping through his fingers. Oh my God, John, what's going on? John sat hunched over in his seat, trying to catch his breath. I thought it was her. I let her in, but I don't know what it really was, John said in a scared whisper. John, you need to go to the hospital right now. Can you even drive? He nodded, trying to sit up straighter. I'm okay. I'm just a little shaken up. He let go of his stomach for a moment, then pressed his hand back to his stomach. He sped off, not letting me get another word in. I was worried that John would bleed out on the way to the hospital, but even more so about how he got that wound. You thought it was her? Was he in the woods and something got to him? I looked up the hill and saw his house lights shining through the trees. I stood on the side of the road for a few moments, trying to piece together our encounter. I took Quincy back inside and was strangely unsettled. I was still worried about Wendy being alone, but now something strange had happened to John. He was probably in shock when he spoke to me, given how strange his words sounded. I spent the evening inside watching TV and made a mental note to leave the porch light on. I went to the kitchen to get a snack and looked out the window. The familiar street lamp was still on, but John's house lights were now off. Did he get back? I asked. Without thinking, I grabbed a flashlight and went outside, walking up John's driveway. I just wanted to make sure he got back safely. As I walked, I noticed his truck was still gone. On top of that, the front door to his house was wide open. I shined my light on the house and into the doorway. Something strange was definitely going on here. I slowly walked towards the door. The closer I got, the more I felt a sense of danger. My emotions finally outweighed my concern. I stopped at a safe distance from which I could see inside, but my flashlight wasn't showing much. I wanted to know more, but I knew I would be crossing a line if I did something. Why was his door open and who turned off the lights? I debated whether to call the police, but what would I say to them? My neighbor left his door open and his lights are off. Before I could do anything, a muffled moan came from deep inside the dark house. The sound shook me, filling me with dread and fear. It sounded an awful lot like Wendy. I was puzzled by what was happening. John had said something earlier, but at that moment I couldn't remember what it was. I was just worried that Wendy had come back and was now all alone. I slowly walked up to the front door as the moan gradually turned into crying. I went to the door and shined my light inside, hoping to see Wendy, but I couldn't. I had never been inside John's house before. I looked inside, hoping to find a light switch. I went into the house. I flipped the first switch I saw, which lit up the entryway, but not the house. "Wendy," I called out. The crying suddenly stopped as if she had just noticed my presence. "Wendy, John went to the hospital. Why don't you just come to my place and we can wait for him there?" Wendy didn't reply. I wasn't expecting a rational response from her and just wanted to let her know I was here. I then heard some quick movement upstairs and the speed of it made me feel uneasy. A thought crossed my mind. What if what I'm hearing isn't Wendy? I shined my light upstairs and a figure slowly appeared. The angle prevented me from making out who I was looking at, but she was in the shape of Wendy. Her long hair was matted and tangled, covering her face. She started sobbing again. I started to approach her when my flashlight caught something that made me stop. A brief flash of green was reflected in her eyes, just like that freaky deer I had seen the other day. Immediately, I knew what I was looking at was not Wendy. Human eyes don't reflect light like animals, especially not green. I stood in the middle of the hallway, frozen in terror. She was getting closer. "Hey, hold on right there," I said, slowly backing up and going out the door. Her head tilted to the side as if she was confused. I closed the door and sprinted down the long, dark driveway to my house. I didn't know I could still run so fast. After getting inside, I tried to catch my breath. I looked out the window to make sure nothing was following me, and thankfully only saw the lights and the shadows. The lights in John's house were off again. I wasn't surprised for some reason. I couldn't help but look out the window that night to see if anything had followed me. I never saw anything. It took me a while to calm down, and even when I did, I let Quincy sleep in my bed. I don't remember falling asleep, but I do remember waking up. Quincy was barking at the window. My groggy state prevented me from understanding what was happening. But when I finally realized, it hit me like a brick. I looked out the window, hoping to see what Quincy was barking at and hoping the yard would be empty. I strained my eyes through the blinds, looking for any movement or silhouette of something I could understand. Then my phone reported that the front door camera detected motion. I opened the app, hoping to see nothing, but I was wrong. Right underneath the porch light, a familiar figure stood, though this time I could see it clearly since it was in an open area. The Wendy-like figure stood about 8 yards from the front door. She was hunched over but shaking and twitching as if she were insane. Her shape looked odd. She was getting closer, her legs and arms twisting unnaturally with every movement. She just stood there, barely lit by the porch light, as if she wanted me to see her, but not too clearly. I watched, holding my breath, not knowing what to do. I watched for a few moments as she slowly went around the side of the house and out of view. I opened my bedroom door, and Quincy followed me as we walked around the house, not knowing where it went. Silence filled the air. We needed to leave. I grabbed my keys, Quincy, and darted out of the house and into my car. I pulled out of the driveway as fast as I could, and my headlights illuminated something tall standing in the backyard. It had similar features to what I had seen before, but this time it was much taller, much more sinister, as if it were no longer pretending. Story 2. I am not an inexperienced hiker, nor am I prone to easily being frightened. My approach to outdoor excursions is characterized by caution and meticulous preparation. I consistently carry a physical map, a headlamp, and a fully equipped first aid kit. I possess an accurate understanding of my pace when traversing rocky terrain. On that particular morning, we selected Old Rag Mountain within the Shenandoah region, renowned for its spectacular ridgeline vistas. Our strategy was to commence our ascent at sunrise, thereby circumventing larger crowds and ensuring our return home before nightfall. It was early November, with the majority of autumn leaves having already fallen. The meteorological forecast predicted clear skies and cold temperatures. The plan appeared straightforward. Our group consisted of 4 individuals: myself, my companion Jared, who invariably carried the comprehensive first aid kit; his girlfriend Tessa, known for maintaining a consistent and reliable hiking tempo; and our friend Luke, who had been afflicted with a troublesome ankle since a previous soccer-related injury. Our intended route followed the customary loop, ascending the ridge trail via its challenging rock scramble, reaching the summit, then descending along the saddle trail and proceeding outwards along the Weekly Hollow Fire Road, ultimately arriving at the parking area situated on Nethers Road. The total distance was estimated to be between 9 and 10 miles. We secured micro spikes to our backpacks as a precautionary measure, anticipating the potential for icy conditions on shaded rock slabs. Jared carried a canister of bear repellent spray, a precaution we internally deemed excessive at the time. We commenced our trek precisely at daybreak. The trail was marked by blue blazes painted upon gray stone surfaces, and a delicate layer of frost shimmered on the fallen leaves. Our exhalations were visibly pluming in the cold air whenever we ceased conversation. Our progress was smooth and efficient when I first observed an individual positioned ahead of us. He was attired in a gray hooded sweatshirt worn beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He never once turned his head to look behind him. His ascent was performed with his hands casually tucked into his front pockets, as if he had no reliance on them for maintaining equilibrium. We issued the customary polite warning regarding a section of slick rock, merely as a cautionary heads-up. He offered no acknowledgement in return. We merely shrugged, understanding that some individuals prefer solitude and silence on the trail. However, here commenced the initial perplexing anomaly. We paused for approximately a minute at a scenic overlook, allowing 2 younger hikers, apparently college students, to pass us before we resumed our position on the trail. Yet no one else had approached from behind us. Subsequently, as we navigated a switchback bend, the individual in the gray hooded garment was once again positioned ahead of us, maintaining the identical preceding distance. I meticulously surveyed the surrounding slope, confirming the absence of any auxiliary paths or shortcuts. Given the advanced stage of autumn with the leaves largely fallen, visibility through the forest was extensive. Had he indeed overtaken us, we would unquestionably have witnessed his passage. We continued to encounter him in this inexplicable manner, consistently ahead, yet never having visibly passed us. We would verbally announce encountering slippery sections, simply out of common courtesy. He, however, did not once turn his head. The hood of his garment was situated unusually high on his neck, creating an impression that the fabric was unable to settle smoothly. I attempted to rationalize this by supposing there was a bulky hat concealed beneath, or perhaps an unconventional hairstyle. We maintained our forward momentum. Upon reaching the upper section of the rock scramble, I distinctly heard Luke draw a sharp breath. He had placed his foot on a moist rock ledge and inadvertently twisted his ankle. There was no audible snap or sudden collapse, only an immediate sensation of pain. We assisted him in sitting down and promptly applied an elastic bandage to the injured joint. He then stood, carefully tested the ankle, and declared that he could continue, provided we adjusted our walking speed. To aid his mobility, we equipped him with 2 hiking poles. Tessa and I each assumed a portion of the additional weight from his backpack, allowing him to alleviate pressure on his ankle. We made the summit quickly, cold and bright, ice and shady cracks. The wind penetrated our multiple layers of clothing with an intensity that the forecast had failed to predict. The solar warmth felt largely ineffective. We did not prolong our stay at the summit. Prioritizing the protection of Luke's injured ankle, We opted for the less strenuous descent. This route would take us down the Saddle Trail and then onto the weekly Hollow Fire Road. This road, after the initial single-track path, is composed of broad gravel and presents a more accommodating gradient. We anticipated having daylight remaining, though not an abundance of it. During our descent, we passed a directional marker for one of the designated bird's nest shelters. The wooden post exhibited a series of long, uniformly applied scratches. These marks were neither haphazard nor convoluted, but rather distinctly spaced in a pattern that immediately drew my attention. I was particularly unsettled by the unusual height at which these markings commenced. We maintained our forward progress, as none of us desired to remain stationary amidst the biting wind. Approximately 100 yards further along, we encountered a section of the trail where coarse, white-tailed deer hair was meticulously arranged in a linear fashion across the pathway. It was not clustered as one might find at a kill site, nor scattered randomly, but precisely aligned. Story 3. Annually, I lead several expeditions during the summer months within the Boundary Waters region. My experience includes numerous cold weather excursions in October, granting me an acute awareness of where daylight first recedes. This particular incident was not the result of inexperience. My companion, Matt, and I had meticulously planned a concise loop route, culminating in a single extended traverse across Knife Lake. Our itinerary included 2 brief portages, with our final destination being the public access landing situated at the terminus of the Gunflint Trail. Our mobile telephones were deliberately secured within our parked truck. Our gear selection was minimalist: a printed map, a compass, 2 headlamps, a single ultralight backpack, and a Kevlar canoe with all contents firmly lashed down. Throughout that week, nighttime temperatures had already fallen below the freezing point. By mid-afternoon, the lake's surface was notably calm and dark. It was the sort of placid condition that deceptively suggests an effortless, unearned mile of progress. For anyone navigating these waters in late October, it is crucial to remember this detail. Such seemingly free miles invariably incur a cost. We traversed a significant portion of Knife Lake from west to east, our canoe's bow oriented towards the southern arm. I maintained a consistent and low-stroke cadence, primarily to conserve strength in my shoulders. I have personally witnessed previously calm waters rapidly become treacherous. We bypassed Thunder Point, omitting our usual stop. We rationalized this by telling ourselves we were foregoing the scenic overlook due to time constraints. But the unvarnished truth was that both of us yearned for the final landing more than the panoramic vista. The air possessed a crisp, dry sharpness that compelled one to swallow more frequently. In such frigid conditions, vigilant attention to one's footwear is paramount, as damp socks can prematurely terminate an outing. Approximately 2 hours distant from our next portage, we glided past a campsite that struck us as distinctly incongruous. Situated 10 feet up the trunk of a birch tree, a straight pole had been securely lashed. From this pole hung various items: scraps of animal fur, a segment of cordage, and a line of bottle caps that had been perforated and wired together, forming a rudimentary set of bells. The bottle caps were dull and lacked luster, indicating they were not recent additions. The fur was not identifiable as deer hair. It appeared to be material from a trapper's line, yet its arrangement was too tidy, positioned too high, and located too far from any discernible trail. I made a discreet pencil mark on the border of our map to note the location. Neither of us spoke at length. The day was so profoundly quiet that each lift of a paddle was accompanied by the gentle drip of water returning to the lake, and we instinctively wished to avoid introducing any additional noise beyond what was necessary. We reached the commencement of the first portage with a comfortable margin of time. Local inhabitants colloquially refer to this particular section as a liftoff, rather than a traditional portage, due to its brevity. Matt assumed responsibility for carrying the canoe, while I carried the backpack. This portage consisted of a narrow, winding strip of earth and exposed roots. We had traversed perhaps 20 steps when we became aware of synchronized movement on both sides of our path. It sounded like two distinct lines of something moving in parallel through the dense undergrowth. The movement was not a crashing, haphazard one, but rather deliberate and precisely placed. When we ceased our movement, the sounds ceased as well. Upon our resumption of movement, the entity paused for a beat, then continued, as if verifying our rhythm before aligning its own. Such a distinct pattern of movement conveys more information than mere tracks ever could. At a curve in the path, we observed a birch tree from which a broad section of bark had been stripped away, freshly enough to reveal the pale, raw wood beneath. Into this exposed surface, 4 deep indentations were pressed, as if individual fingertips had been forcefully driven directly through the tree's outer layer. The spatial arrangement of these marks was inconsistent with what I would consider a normal human hand. I instinctively pressed one of my own fingers into the bark adjacent to one of the divots. The indentation was both narrower and significantly deeper than my own finger could create by a substantial margin, and I am not a person of small build. We refrained from exchanging speculative theories while on the trail. We completed the portage in silence and smoothly launched our canoe into the pristine waters of Otter Track. An unknown entity accompanied us on that lake. It maintained its position close to the shoreline, precisely matching our pace without generating any audible splashing. In such exceptionally calm conditions, even a minor splash is discernible from a considerable distance, yet there was none. With each promontory we navigated, we would spot it again ahead of us as if it had traversed a path imperceptible to our eyes. One attempts to rationalize such occurrences, perhaps attributing them. Story 4. I am a rock climber from Ohio, currently on a temporary visit. My climbing partner for that particular day, Tyler, was raised in the state of Kentucky and dedicates the majority of his weekends to scaling formations within the Red River Gorge. We had spent the entire afternoon engaged in climbing activities at locations known as Left Flank and Bruise Brothers. Our hands were raw from the friction with the sandstone rock. Feeling a sense of accomplishment, we began to pack up our gear. The day was a weekday in the latter part of October. The designated parking areas were only partially occupied, and the ambient air was sufficiently cool that climbing chalk proved genuinely effective. Tyler proposed that we pursue the experience of observing a sunset from a minor arch formation he had discovered years prior, situated somewhere off Tunnel Ridge Road. He specified that this was not one of the renowned, well-trafficked spans, but rather a more secluded spot. His plan involved a brief deviation from a less-traveled social trail, allowing us to witness the sky ignite with orange hues above the tree canopy and return to our vehicle before the necessity of headlamps became a factor. I carried a half coil of climbing rope within my backpack and a functional illumination device. Tyler, out of ingrained habit, retained a selection of climbing nuts and small cams clipped to his harness and carried a water bottle that audibly tapped against his thigh with each step. We were without a physical map and made no attempt to access any digital navigation on a mobile phone. His described plan was straightforward: park our vehicle off Arbor Guard Service Route 39, proceed along a faint pathway leading towards the Star Gap region, maintain our position on elevated terrain, and allow the natural contours of the ridgelines to guide our direction. I placed my trust in him, and similarly, in my own cultivated ability to interpret the natural landscape. This combined confidence very nearly led us to a perilous precipice. We departed from the gravel road at approximately 5 o'clock in the evening. The daylight presented that characteristic late autumn angle where every shadow appears more profound than its actual depth. The initial segment of our journey was uncomplicated. Beneath our feet were flat sandstone plates. Dense laurel bushes bordered the pathway, which itself formed a narrow ridge, dropping sharply away on both flanks. Tyler indicated minor landmarks as we proceeded. He remembered a shallow rock overhang on the left, an aged split-rail fence post gradually decaying into the earth, and a low, fin-like stone formation featuring a notch that one could heel hook for amusement. He asserted that he had traversed this area countless times. He claimed to know the first half of the route intimately from memory, and could accurately navigate the remainder by dead reckoning. I did not challenge his assertion, though in hindsight I should have. We encountered the first unsettling anomaly approximately 20 minutes into our trek. Upon a tree stump situated adjacent to the path, a freshly removed deer hide was laid out smoothly, with its flesh side facing upwards. It appeared as though someone had commenced a tanning process and then inexplicably disappeared. There was no evidence of a campsite, no fire ring, no nearby animal carcass, no tarp, nothing to suggest this was an ongoing project. The animal's hair still retained the natural sheen it possesses before accumulating dirt dulls its appearance. Neither of us made contact with it. 10 paces further, we arrived at a wooden post that had once supported a trail marker. Its surface had been meticulously scraped flat, deeply into the wood grain, and subsequently re-engraved with elongated vertical lines. Each groove was remarkably clean and precisely straight. There was no identifying number, no trail blaze, only these singular tally marks. I felt an immediate primal reaction on the skin of my arms, an instinctive response preceding full cognitive awareness. The ridgeline continued its undulating path. Tyler repeatedly assured me, "It's just beyond the next saddle." However, each subsequent saddle merely led into yet another. Daylight began to recede first from the lower hollows. Our eyes adapted to the diminishing light, but our effective visual range shortened with each step. At precisely 6:10 p.m., with the sun barely touching the highest points of the terrain, we encountered a confusing intersection of 3 faint paths amidst a dense grove of laurel. Tyler scrutinized each option, then Story 5. I implore you, if your travels ever lead you to hike through Lost Valley during the nascent weeks of November, to commit 3 fundamental principles to memory. First, always ensure your position allows for a visual range of at least 30 yards ahead. Second, upon the loss of that critical line of sight, immediately emit a loud, distinct sound. And third, maintain continuous forward momentum, orienting yourself towards other human beings. Do not squander precious moments by demanding an explanation from an unfamiliar individual as to how he managed to appear ahead of you on a one-lane path. Do not engage in disputes over discrepancies in timing that are off by even a half beat. These essential rules were not acquired from an online video tutorial or an internet discussion forum. Rather, I assimilated them alongside my father on the banks of the Buffalo National River in the vicinity of Ponca, Arkansas. This occurred on a particular morning when our intention was to observe elk, and we embarked on what should have been an uneventful short-day hike. I was then 24 years old, visiting home for an extended weekend, while my father was 54. Throughout most of my life, we had routinely undertaken simple trail excursions together. That morning, we had observed male elk, or bulls, herding female elk, or cows, within Boxley Valley at the break of dawn. Their breath was visibly pluming in the cold air, and young calves moved closely alongside their mothers along the fence boundary. Once the sun had fully risen above the ridgeline, the vehicular traffic began to subside. We drove for a few minutes to the Lost Valley trailhead. Our plan for the hike was undemanding. Follow Clark Creek, explore one adjacent hollow, and then turn back by early afternoon. Our mobile phones were switched off. We carried no earbuds and no other electronic gadgets were in use. We were equipped with a physical map, 2 water bottles, appropriate clothing layers, snacks, headlamps, out of sheer habit, a whistle securely clipped to my dad's chest strap, and my emergency rescue inhaler strategically placed at the very top of my day pack. We commenced our hike at approximately 9:30 a.m. The misty veil that had lingered over the pasture land had largely dissipated. The atmospheric conditions were cool and remarkably still. The initial segment of the trail was broad and easily traversable. Limestone formed the path underfoot, flanked by cedar and hardwood trees on both sides, with imposing bluff lines rising in layers to our right. Clark Creek remained consistently to our left, its waters sufficiently clear to reveal pale rocks on its bed. We engaged in casual conversation about a family matter I was attempting to avoid, maintaining a walking pace that allowed us to breathe comfortably through our noses. The initial anomaly, in isolation, appeared inconsequential. On a moist slab of rock positioned beside the creek was the perfectly preserved imprint of a right boot. The tread pattern was sharp and distinct, with a heavier impression along the outer edge, suggesting the wearer exhibited a slight outward roll of the foot. It was the sort of print that prompts immediate speculation regarding footwear size, perhaps an 11, and the origin of such unique soles. Approximately 10 yards further on the identical type of rock, we discovered another such impression. It displayed the same pattern and consistent pressure points. However, this time it was a perfect mirror image. It was not the print of a left boot, nor did it show any signs of a heel dragging. It was unequivocally the same right boot, flawlessly reversed, as if a duplicate had been pressed into the rock in opposition. This unsettling observation lodged itself in my mind, akin to the sensation of stepping on a nail and convincing oneself that the skin remains unbroken. We then entered a minor side hollow that received sunlight from a slightly higher angle. The ground beneath was carpeted with matted, compacted leaves. In the central area of this small clearing, a pile of wet leaves had been compressed into an oval shape, and something had been dragged across it, creating 2 parallel lines. These grooves were spaced uniformly, much like the tines of a fork. Adjacent to this, 4 thin sticks were arranged in a neat row. Abruptly, the line of marks ceased.